Thank you.
Can I start that again?
So we're starting the public interview at 7:03 p.m. Thank you, everybody, for your patience with us as we get ourselves going. We are very excited to welcome our superintendent candidate, John Bucky, who comes to us as he's currently principal at Nantucket High School. And you think I had that, and then with everything else, my brain loses things. So we are very excited to have you here, very excited to be in this process. We thank you for the time, and we really look forward to tonight and hearing more about you. So you have before you the questions. I'm just going to explain a little bit of what we are.
Oh, the video aspect.
We need a roll call vote before.
Oh, yes.
Before we do anything else. Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you for reminding me of that.
I think also the reminder of the audio, we're being recorded tonight.
Yeah.
Oh, you're a good guy.
Okay, so first I'm going to say, luckily this is a team effort, so first I'm going to say that under Massachusetts general law, just to make sure that everyone is aware that we are recording night, and if anyone else chose to record, just please let us know, and then everyone is aware of recordings that are occurring for this public meeting. Secondly, we had to, last minute, thank you for your flexibility due to natural events. So where the snow kept us from yesterday, so we need to do a roll call vote because we did change the agenda. So we need to go into a roll call vote in order to allow for the amendment to the agenda to conduct first this interview with John Bucky, and then we shifted the time, and then our next interview will occur with Jim Adams after this. So that amended agenda, we need a roll call vote in order to be able to accept this new agenda item. So I'm going to start on the end tomorrow.
Here? Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
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 Natasha, yes?
Mary, yes.
Bethlyn, yes. Okay, so we're 5-0, roll call vote. We have amended the agenda, and we may now begin. Okay, anything else? So we are going to just, each of us was given 2 topics that we worked with to be able to work in that domain and ask some questions within that topic. So we will be asking those, and then we've also gotten a pre-submitted question. We opened it up to the community. There was, of course, a short timeline, but we did end up getting one pre-submitted question that Lydia was able to put together, and we will have a question from a community member as well for you tonight. And we will be going from, since we are essentially starting the interview at 7:05, we'll go until 8:20, so that you have an hour and 15 minutes of interview time. And we do encourage each person, if they feel like their particular question, we didn't quite get what they were looking for as a school committee member, that they can follow up with a probe to get a little bit further information or ask for some clarity. And the last thing to know is that we aren't particularly timing either the questions or the responses, but we are aware of the general time, and I will just keep us aware of that as we move forward if we need to.
And there are 10 questions, just for your own, just
10 topics.
10 topics, yeah.
There's more than 10 questions if you actually, Okay, very good. So I'm going to start us with just an opening question to get us going.
Great.
So now that you've had a chance to spend the day in the district, and you've been listening and learning about our district, we'd just like to know what your impressions and observations, what rises to the top for you as you consider what are our unique strengths and challenges of our Maynard Public Schools, including what surprised you the most today.
Okay, thank you. I just want to begin by saying thank you. I know what an important decision this is for your community, and the amount of time and graciousness and welcoming that I've experienced today has been reaffirming of my decision to seek the superintendency here. Thank you to Lydia for all of your logistical assistance. Mauro, thank you for being my chauffeur today. It's been an impressive day. I won't lie, it has been a whirlwind. I have toured all of your buildings and met with various stakeholders, and I think the passion for this community is what really shines through. People are proud of Maynard. They're proud of your schools, and they have high expectations for the next superintendent, which is very encouraging for me. The buildings have a welcoming culture. I've shared with a couple people, not sure what to expect at Green Meadow. If all you know is what you've read in the newspaper or read in school committee agendas and minutes, I thought maybe I'd come into a Harry Potter type situation, but what a lovely school. Children were engaged, faculty members were energetic and enthusiastic, people were kind and gracious and welcoming to me. I enjoyed getting to meet the central office staff today. I think one of the things that surprised me were some of the vacancies that you have on the horizon. As I look at it, Green Meadow is going to be looking for an administrative team. You have a director of technology that's coming on mid-year. You have a business director that has just announced that she is moving on. So those are things that surprise me, but I see them as opportunities for the district as well. For a new superintendent to be able to come in and to build a team and to select people that are a good fit for this community, I think is a wonderful opportunity for someone seeking the superintendency here. So it has been a great day. People have been open and honest. I appreciated the fact of the transparency from each of the constituent groups that I met with. I didn't feel like anyone was holding back information. They're willing to really champion and celebrate and be proud of the accomplishments here, and they're equally as transparent about the challenges that a new superintendent will face. And I think that that will only help you moving forward to pick the person that is the right fit for this community.
Thank you.
What are the steps that you've taken in the past to make improvements to specific curriculum within your current school district or previous? And how did you implement the curriculum, and what assessment tools did you utilize to determine what was working and what, on the other hand, needed further steps?
I think curriculum is, in a small district, an issue that is ongoing. You hire people and you make progress in curriculum, and then they move on, and that becomes a proprietary curriculum and it goes with them. So at the high school level in Nantucket, we have a science teacher, and we spend a couple years building a science curriculum, and the next generation science standards come out, and we adapt the curriculum to meet changing frameworks and standards, and then that educator gets a job in a community in America, as we call it on the island, and suddenly that curriculum is gone. And so one of the things that we have done is to implement a curriculum review cycle. And so that is a 5-year cycle where there are 2 disciplines each year that are in different stages of that 5-year cycle of reviewing. So you use foundations at your elementary school here for literacy along with balanced literacy. You also use Go Math. So in a 5-year cycle, you would be looking at different curricula, picking one, implementing that, assessing where you are with that, and then starting again on that 5-year cycle. That doesn't mean every 5 years you're picking a new curriculum, but it's in a cycle where stakeholder groups have an opportunity to provide feedback. So if you're looking for a new Spanish language curriculum, then you would look at that in the first year and have students and parents involved in that process providing feedback. You would adopt that curriculum, you would implement that, assess where you are, and then it's a continuous review cycle. I think a challenge in a small district is also scope and sequence. And what is happening at Green Meadow is that transitioning to Fowler, is that making its way to Maynard High School. And the road to a warm place is paved with good intentions. And I think that your transition years from 3 to 4, you have a unique configuration. I think going back to your question at the beginning, clearly I knew that coming into the district, but seeing how that works today from Green Meadow to Fowler to the high school was eye-opening for me, and I heard from various people that those transition years are not always as clean and well articulated as they might be. So as a new superintendent coming in, that would be an easy look to see what are those transitions like, and do you have time for K-12 educators to work together to vertically look at scope and sequence in curriculum. The challenge is at the primary levels, your teachers are teaching all 5 disciplines. So at the high school, you're departmentalized, and at the middle school, you may have teams. But at the elementary school, if you say, okay, we're going to do a vertical curriculum day, well, is the 3rd grade teacher going to be the English piece, the math piece, the social studies piece, the science piece? That's where your curriculum review cycle would come in and be helpful, because you would be in stages of that cycle and then help to identify educators that might teach more than one class, or more than one subject, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
We use Understanding by Design for curriculum development, which is a backwards design. Ty McWigan, we just had professional development for faculty because it had been about 5 years before we provided them professional development about how to write curriculum units. With technology today, you can keep that proprietary piece from happening by using an electronic provider like a Rubicon Atlas, where your curriculum is housed in a central location, a repository through the central office, so that when you hire a new 7th grade math teacher, you can say the 7th grade math curriculum is here, these are the 8 units that we use, these are the assessments that we use to make sure that the curriculum is being followed with fidelity.
It's called Curriculum Atlas?
Rubicon Atlas is a curriculum mapping software program.
Thank you.
I just want to, we just had a few new people come in. I just want to mention that at the back table, close to the door, but kind of halfway between here and the door, there's some papers if anyone wanted to grab those. Thank you.
Like many districts, Maynard has not been able to consistently provide a level service budget because of cuts. This past year, we also experienced declining enrollment, which resulted in a decrease in Chapter 70 funding compared to previous years. Considering these potential trends in future years, how will you approach these issues while still providing an engaging curriculum to keep students from leaving our district and keeping out-of-district costs down? Who do you think are the key constituents that you would need to work with?
It's a big question. There's a lot of pieces there. Yeah. The Chapter 70 funding, when I was in Littleton, actually one of our parents was the gentleman who wrote that formula, and I'm not sure he could even explain to us what that formula, how it was to work. I understand Chapter 70 funding formula is in transition, which I see as a good thing. At the state level, I'm fortunate through my role as president of the the School Administrators Association to have quarterly meetings with the commissioner. I think I joked with people earlier today, I don't know if it's a good thing or the bad thing that the Commissioner of Education knows me by name, but having access to him to be able to discuss things like funding formulas in areas where smaller districts struggle. Attrition, school choice, where I am currently, we're not a school choice school, just by our geographic. When I was in Littleton, we were school choice. And so the biggest constituent piece that we had were parents and families understanding why they would make decisions to leave the district. And some of that could be as simple as the neighboring school has an orchestra, you don't. We're not going to be able to implement programs that will keep every family, but sometimes the cost of doing business is keeping a program that may be undersubscribed, and I think in terms of an advanced placement program. If students want rigorous coursework and they're thinking, well, I can't stay at Maynard High School because they don't offer, and you offer an advanced placement class, but there's only 5, that sometimes is worth it not to have a student or a family school choice out of the district. So the constituent group that I think would be most important is students and families, and using data to understand why they would make the decision to leave the district, and at what point are they leaving the district. Is it in a transition year? Is it from the elementary school? And so I'm a big proponent of using exit surveys, exit interviews with families, because if you start to see consonant themes emerging, people are leaving the district because X, Y, or Z, then you can put things in place to maybe ameliorate some of those losses. I think there were several parts of that question I want to... I think it's ongoing as well in terms of future years. As you identify something that might be an issue for families to choice out, you could identify reasons for people to choice in as well. Are there programs in Maynard that we are under marketing? Are there things that are special and unique? And from my experience in the district today, there are, that would keep families here, but also attract families from neighboring systems that, well, Maynard offers this, but we don't. And so I think in a digital age where you have technology as a resource, marketing, your wonderful your broadcast journalism program, using that to your advantage as something that a neighboring school doesn't offer. And so are there students in neighboring districts that might be interested in television production or radio broadcasting and editing that, wow, I could go to Maynard and do that, whereas my district doesn't offer it.
Okay. Wow, did that address, is there anything else?
I think for the most part, I think you did address it, but I guess I'm wondering how you would deal with the curriculum issues when it comes to not having as much money because we're not getting the funding.
I think you've made a step in the right direction with the broadcasting program becoming a Chapter 74 recognized program. Are there other areas where you could have efficiencies in the curriculum? I saw a wood shop at the middle school, high school today, not a wood shop, but more of a maker space that is being underutilized. You are space rich, which a lot of districts would be envious of. How you're using that to maybe develop programs that would keep or attract students here. And I think that, you know, your broadcasting program is one of those. The maker space in the middle school, really lauding those curricular areas where you could use it as a marketing tool.
Okay.
Thank you.
How do you see yourself as an evaluator? Do you have a specific methodology for providing feedback and guidance? How do you ensure the improvement and development of district personnel performance? And what is your procedure for dealing with employees who continue to fail to meet the goals you've set for them?
I lead the evaluation committee on Nantucket. Many years ago, when the Massachusetts Model Educator Evaluation System came in, you had the option of adopting what the state put together, adapting what the state had, or developing a unique system of your own. We chose the ADAPT model, and it is the longest running committee. I co-chair it with the president of the Teachers Association, and when we adapted it, we were using the teacher rubrics for everyone, which at the time seemed like a good idea with the adaptations that we made. But if you're a librarian or a nurse or a school counselor or a social worker, using the teacher rubric didn't make a lot of sense and wasn't providing you good feedback. So we developed internally a number of rubrics. The state has since caught up to that and offers a rubric for school psychologists, school counselors. But I think it provides a common language where you have unsatisfactory, needs improvement, proficient, and exemplary. Proficient is where you want 90% of your people to be. 90% probably think of themselves as exemplary, but using those educators that you identify as exemplary can be a resource internally for you for those educators in need of improvement. And so I wrote my dissertation on mentoring. I'm a strong proponent of mentors, particularly in a small district where oftentimes we will hand somebody the keys to their classroom or the keys to their office and say, best wishes. And I think the work that I've done with the State Principals Association, I think the State Superintendents Association under Tom Scott has done a great job of building mentoring programs for superintendents. We've not been as successful with principals, and so that's some of the work that I did in my year as president of the association to work with the superintendents group on why is your program so successful and how can we implement something for building level administrators, and so providing that mentoring component. I think sometimes we steer clear of difficult conversations, and the reason that we steer clear of them is there's a lack of relationships. And I think relationships and respect go hand in hand, and you can't have either one if you're absent. And so as superintendent, you need to be out in the buildings, you need to be out in the community, so that when you have someone who isn't meeting standards, you can engage that conversation as somebody who can cite when you were in their classroom, when you were in their school. And my superintendent and I share an understanding that sometimes addition through subtraction is the best opportunity that you have. And so through coaching, through support, sometimes it's necessary to counsel someone out of the profession. You have the educator evaluation system. One thing that surprised me, I'm going to keep coming back to the opening question, was a lack of administrative evaluation that is happening in asking people, how are you evaluated here? How do you receive feedback about job performance? And I think the state system in goal setting provides an opportunity for people to demonstrate what they're achieving in any given year, and for the superintendent to provide building level administrators and directors feedback based on their work on goals and identified areas for improvement. And again, I think you have the same opportunity as well for exemplary administrators to use them as a resource for people who might be struggling. And even though it's not maybe an exact job alike, your special education director would be very different from your director of facilities, but if they have strengths in leading a team or accomplishing goals, to use them as a resource for one another.
Thank you.
Anything else? Or are you all set with that?
No.
Okay.
All right. Aside from personnel evaluations, how else do you plan to hold your leadership teams accountable on an ongoing basis in measuring improvements within each department at the district level, for developing and implementing school improvement plans at each school, and in the need to improve school culture that reinforces an inclusive mindset and reverses the trend of families seeking out-of-district education?
Again, another big question. There are a lot of component parts.
Unpack it slowly.
I think districts are rich in data, but tend to underutilize data. You have accountability data through the department in terms of attendance rates, discipline data, but how are you using that information to make departmental or systemic changes? If you see you have an attendance issue across the district and that is persisting each year, but you're not implementing anything at building levels to address an attendance issue, I think you're missing an opportunity to use data. A lot of schools will talk about data-informed decision-making. That's one of those education jargon things that everyone likes to say, but if you're not providing people professional development opportunities in how to use a protocol for using data, then it just becomes a catchphrase. And so we have identified in our district the data-driven dialogue and a 4-step process for observing the data, going visual with the data of, what is this information telling us? If you were to make this a visual representation of the data, which is hugely insightful for people, particularly when you're looking at standardized test scores. It can be easy to just kind of blank over and take a very superficial look at things. We have this number at meet and exceeds expectation and this percentage. But if you start to unpack that, represent that information visually, and then start to ask questions about what is this data telling us. I think that too often we look at data and jump to the assumptions. Mm-hmm. And those assumptions are often, well, the 4th grade teachers didn't teach this, or the 9th grade teachers didn't cover that, or students didn't take but if you're doing a data-driven dialogue process where you have a sequential step and you're training staff on how to look at information and how to unpack it, then it's much easier to take the next step of how do we remedy this information, or how do we put processes in place that will help to reverse that trend. School culture. Torrance Deal refers to school culture as the way we do things here. And I'm not sure, as the new superintendent coming in, that I would immediately be able to tell you the way we do things here. That I would need to listen and observe and analyze information as I'm learning it from various constituent groups. I've talked to a couple groups today about an entry plan where I would have a series of questions that I would ask various stakeholders, chief of police, the fire chief, the town manager, director of the DPW, the parent group, CPAC, your English learner families, teachers, paraprofessionals, students, and consonant themes would begin to emerge from that information. If you hear something from one person, that's probably not the way we do things here. But if you hear it from 4, 5, 6, 12 different people over the course of various stakeholder groups, then you could identify that as the way we do things here. That would include things that are sacred to Maynard, the things that are valued, respected, that a new person coming in should definitely not tinker with, and then those areas that are for growth, that are opportunity areas. I would probably in November present that information to school committee, that over the course of the first 90 days that I was here, these are the interviews that I conducted. My hope would be that would be over 100 interviews of various stakeholders. These are the themes, these are the takeaways, but even with the opportunities, not to be so bold as to say, these are the things that we're going to address, but then to take those and to say, these are opportunities for the district, which areas do we want to tackle first, and how do we want to engage that work? Curriculum might be, that's something that I've heard a lot about today, but it could be school safety and security measures. It could be social emotional learning components. So doing an entry plan, gathering the data, reporting that out, because one thing that I've also heard is people say we're asked for information but not quite sure what happens once they get it. And so for me to conduct 100 interviews and then people say, well, we didn't do anything with that information, I think is not good. So we would want to use that information in a meaningful way where people say, I actually felt heard. This guy listened to me. He heard, he recognized that this is an area for us to celebrate, or this is an area in need of improvement, and he's engaging with the school committee to help him to address this.
So I can have a follow-up.
Please.
What I'd like to get more insight would be how you would hold your leadership team accountable in utilizing the data, aside from an evaluation, because the data part is the what. Mm-hmm. how do you reflect on engaging your leadership team and holding them accountable to follow what you're outlining for them to do?
Well, I think collaboratively we develop goals and we progress monitor those goals, and meeting as a team, identifying the systemic and structural groups that would meet. I could envision a central office leadership group of directors, your director of student services, facilities, director, meeting. I would do individual meetings with those stakeholders, with those directors in addition to group meetings, and then a larger leadership team, which would include building level administrators. I think in terms of strategic planning, you set goals, you have strategic initiatives each year to meet those goals, you have benchmarks along the way to assess whether you're meeting those goals, and then rolling those into future planning. And so if you have clearly articulated what the priorities are, who's responsible for what, that gives you the accountability mechanism that you're looking for, that, okay, this was a special education issue, and these were the agreed upon outcomes or the initiatives that we were going to take. These were the desired outcomes, and these were the results. And I think that that is a very kind of concrete, sequential way of somebody looking at, I'm getting evaluation feedback based on data, not on just subjective factors for how I did the work.
Okay. Take a sip. We'll keep going. You're doing great. Thank you for managing with all of our questions. Okay, so I'm going to ask you about problem solving. Can you tell us a time that you problem solved effectively in your role as principal? Or I understand that you have been taking on roles beyond that, so whatever is relevant, please share, under a great deal of pressure. Conversely, please describe a problem-solving process you used under much pressure that did not work out well, and explain what you learned from that experience.
Mm-hmm. It's a recent example. We have an automated system for our school security measures, and a couple years ago I recorded our automated system of going into a lockdown situation. So we have mechanisms that if there's a problem in the school, that automated system is put into place, and we go into the security protocols that we train for. I was at the superintendent's office and I got a text message from my assistant principal saying, "Where are you?" I thought, well, that seems rather aggressive, but I'm at the superintendent's office meeting with Mike, and she said, "You need to get back now." Apparently, unbeknownst to us at the time, the lockdown system was engaged. And so my voice came across the PA, "This is lockdown, it's not a drill. We are in lockdown, it's not a drill. Go into lockdown, it's not a drill." And so the assistant principal was covering a class for a teacher who was out, and this came on the PA. We didn't know why this happened. And so I'm running back to the building. We have a campus situation here, so it's maybe 300 yards from the superintendent's office back to the high school. And so we were trying to determine, did somebody engage this by mistake? And with each minute in a situation like that seems like hours. And so we came to find out that everything is done in the cloud now, and our security vendor was fixing a door at the elementary school and had completed that work and let our facilities director know, "I've managed the locking mechanism on the door. It's all fixed. Great." What they didn't say is they decided they would stay in the system and poke around to see if there were any other issues. And so they went back online, and there was a connection point at the high school that was engaged so that when they went back online, engaged the system. And so we were trying to figure out, did somebody hit it by mistake? What I learned is as soon as we could get information to people, we were getting it to them. But as you can imagine, we're on an island. Nobody's very far from the school, so everyone is descending upon the school. And so the silver lining was teachers and students did exactly what we have trained to do. They locked down in their classrooms, they jumped out of windows, they ran away, they evaded, they followed the Alice protocol with fidelity. What you never train for is reunification, because in the event of an actual emergency, reunification may not be possible for days if there's an incident of a tragedy in your school. This was a false alarm. We were able to, 15 minutes later, get information out that this was a false alarm, but we had hundreds of families descending, and so how do you go out of lockdown through a strategic process of the unlock while keeping families who feel that there has been a critical incident in the building informed? And so I felt good in our post process of how we engage the community to provide feedback, to celebrate what had gone well, to take ownership, even though I'm not the vendor, of what had happened, to recognize the emotional impact that had. We engaged our mental health providers as the unlock process was happening, so that there were a team of counselors and therapists and support people for children who were understandably traumatized. We held a faculty meeting after school that day. We met with town officials, the police department, the fire department, the state police, the next day to review everything that happened. So I feel good about that in terms of a difficult decision, of the decisions that we made along the way to make sure that the campus was safe. And then when that happened, when we could determine safely that there wasn't a threat in the building, to get communication out. Since then, we have worked with the police department on being able to use technology where there's an app called ProPhoenix that will, in an emergency, when I'm at the superintendent's office, if something happens, that I can, in real time, be providing families information so that an immediate text message goes out. The high school has gone into lockdown. Families should report to the location point rather than having them coming into the building, because that was a piece of it, that families were knocking on windows looking for their kids, and if you're in a lockdown, that's further traumatizing because they don't know if that's a bad guy pounding on the windows. So there were a lot of takeaways from that in terms of difficult decisions that I feel that we did very well. The other one will be much shorter, because who wants to spend a lot of time on a decision that you feel didn't go well? I think when I first got to Nantucket, there was a very adversarial relationship with the administration in the teachers union. And I think that I made some decisions in my first couple years there that I didn't involve stakeholders in, that now would just be common sense to me. One that I think of in particular is parent-teacher conferences. Well, that sounds like a very simple thing. Of course, you have parent-teacher conferences, but it wasn't the culture there to have parent-teacher conferences. And in my first open house, I announced, we're going to have parent-teacher conferences this year. And the head of the union president blew off right in front of me. And so now, looking back in retrospect, having had more conversations, having engaged, and that's one thing that I'm very proud of, is the relationship that I have with the Nantucket Teachers Association, because I think that we work very well together. And in 10 years, I have no unresolved grievances with the union, and in 10 years, I have had 0 grievances filed by the union.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you provide one or two examples of a difficult decision that you had to make in your current district? Describe your process for thinking through the decision, and if you relied on others to help you think through these decisions, tell us what qualities you value in them to assist you in this type of situation.
I think personnel decisions are oftentimes the most difficult decisions that we make as educators. I don't think anyone goes into education because they're not a nurturer or they don't care about children. And to have someone who is not meeting standards, who might be working hard and trying, that you need to counsel out of the profession is difficult. I think working with the teachers union, I have teachers on improvement plans, and being very open and honest about those areas for growth and development, and being very specific in the benchmarks and the outcomes that you want them to achieve, having regular meetings, providing specific feedback, having measurable things that are both that are quantifiable, in addition to kind of the qualitative observations that you make in a classroom, providing support and mentors of teachers who are exemplary to maybe in the area where the person on an improvement plan has a weakness, having them work with a colleague. I think that's mutually beneficial. Adding observers in, so the assistant principal may go in, a director might go in addition to me as a primary evaluator, and just the ongoing open dialogue and feedback about why it might not be working. And it shouldn't come as a surprise, particularly for non-professional status teachers. If you get to the end of the third year and you're not going to be moving that person on to professional status, that shouldn't come as a surprise. I don't think that's fair to an educator. And there are instances where sometimes it seems like it comes as a surprise to someone, despite ongoing conversations and despite the feedback. Sometimes people listen and don't hear. And so I think that those are sometimes the most difficult decisions that we make. Budgetary decisions are also challenging, because in a small district, a program is often a person. And so if you're transitioning a program out or eliminating a program, that can be a person. And as human beings, you take that personally. So we had a behavior specialist, behavior modification program, and in a year where we had a $800,000 budget deficit, that had the least impact to services, direct services to children. Wonderful program to have in place, but if you're making up a budget deficit, I think the more conversations you have with people about budget reductions and the more input that you solicit, we do a very bottom-up budget process. We start with teachers and solicit their input, develop priorities. Certainly, people are not always going to get 100% of everything that they want. You've mentioned in an earlier question about level funding your budget. There's no such thing as a level funded budget. That means cuts, because your roll forward is always going to be more than you have in the current fiscal year. And so developing budget priorities from faculty, using your school council, agreeing upon those, even though somebody might be disappointed that that program or that addition to the budget is not realized, working intimately with the town in knowing what that dollar figure, I think you guys are looking at 4.5% for next year. And so what that dollar figure is, and then working with the administrative team that each building isn't going to get 100% of what they're putting forward, but what is in the best interest of students in the district, and agreeing on those, so that when it gets to the school committee, there has been a very favorable vetting process. And people may show up to your school committee to advocate for something that's not appearing in the budget, but your administrative team can then cite the number of steps that got to where that was, so that school committee isn't seen as the people making the budget decisions. Ultimately, you may have to decide on some final priorities, but there have been enough conversations along the way that people understand that the ultimate decisions for budget need to match what the town funding is going to equal.
Great, thank you.
What are your views on special education ELL pullouts as they relate to classroom inclusion and the need for paraprofessionals? Can you give an example of how you've dealt with this issue in your district? What outcome did you have, and was it what you expected?
I have said this a couple times today. The English language learner population on Nantucket has increased by 500% in the 12 years that I have been there. We started off with 6 students in the high school in my first year, with 1 teacher. We have 72 students in the high school alone this year, with 2 full-time teachers. With that has come programming decisions. It is a very different English language learner at Green Meadow than you would have at Maynard High School, because oftentimes the students that you see coming in with language learning issues, you're sitting them in a biology class, an algebra class, a US history class, and asking them to learn content. So we have developed, through our access scores, using access data, tiered levels of instruction, from beginners to intermediate to developing to bridging learners. Those are double periods for lower level language learners, and then single periods. We use some content classes. A foundations is what we call it, course in math, science, and social studies, so that English learners are taught by a content teacher, but we have an English learner teacher in as well. We hired a bilingual paraprofessional to also support those. I think sometimes in districts it's very attractive to hire a paraprofessional, and rather than supporting classroom teachers with differentiating the instruction. And sometimes classroom teachers will look and say, those children, as opposed to our children. And so English learners or special education students are our children. And it isn't necessarily solving the problem by hiring a paraprofessional, by having another adult in the room, but supporting classroom teachers by being able to differentiate their instruction in order to meet the needs of diverse learners in classrooms. Special education on Nantucket is unique in that we do not have a special education day placement. We do not have a vocational technical school to send students that have diverse learning profiles to. My stepson went to Upper Cape Tech, was the best decision we made. He had an 8th grade year in Wareham that was miserable for him because he wasn't a traditional classroom learner. You put him at the vocational technical high school, he flourished. He was working with his hands, he was getting the academics that he needed, but he was engaging with content that was meaningful to him. On Nantucket, we don't have those options, so we need to develop programs internally to meet diverse learning needs. If we can't, that's a residential placement off the island. And so a typical residential placement is going to cost $200,000, $250,000 a year. For us, financially, it makes much more fiscal sense to hire a teacher at $80,000 or a paraprofessional at $30,000 to be able to provide inclusive educational opportunities. The question is talking about pullout. I think there's a time and a place which we have for our English learners and our special education in terms of reading and study skills support, some executive functioning groups, some language development courses where those are the supports that they need. But I think having students in the general education classroom is as valuable as supporting unique learning profiles. We developed a PE PALS program a couple of years ago, which is our most intensive special needs students taking PE with peers. And if you ever need your heart warmed, go to the PE PALS class, because our peers get as much out of that experience. And we provide teaching assistant opportunities for students, which is also a budget saving move, because a student that's interested in becoming a special educator, that's interested in becoming a chemistry teacher or a music teacher, could get credit by doing a teaching assistant for that teacher. Teachers love it because they're able to have supports in the classroom if they need to do sidebar work or small group instruction, and it really provides an opportunity for students to explore an area of passion or of interest to them.
Thank you.
Please give examples of teams that you have overseen in the past. Describe one that worked well together and one that had functional issues. How or why were they different? What methods did you find were effective in maintaining the engagement and commitment of each group?
I think a good example would be our department chairs at the high school. We purposefully renamed them to department leaders because we wanted them to be more than just a conduit of information from the principal back to their departments. We wanted them to be a resource for teachers in that department of being content specialists, of being someone, if there was a question about curriculum or assessment, if they wanted someone to come in and to observe a lesson and to provide non-evaluatory feedback as a peer coaching model. And we did professional development with them in order to move from that department chair, which is basically somebody who gets a stipend to take information from the administration back to the department, to a team leader, to a department leader who is a science content expert or a math content person that teachers in that department could go to as a resource. Administratively, I have been on teams where it didn't work, not necessarily because people weren't knowledgeable, but because of the dynamics of a team. And I think respect is very important to building understanding and collaboration in a team. And it goes back to people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And when teams are dysfunctional, it often is from a lack of respect. And I can think of a curriculum director that we had who was simply brilliant, but toxic to the team. And so there wasn't trust on the administrative team, and people weren't collaborating together. And that comes back to the addition through subtraction idea, that if you looked at the credentials and what she was able to bring, you would think, wow, what a resource. But if they're taking more than they're giving, sometimes it's better to have addition through subtraction.
Anything else on that, Lydia?
No, I think that's it.
How do you use effective communication skills to engage and build relationships with internal and external stakeholders in order to advocate the district's priorities and to disseminate your leadership message in a manner that gains buy-in? And then specify the framework of engagement you follow to ensure your leadership message is connecting with union leadership.
I think if I don't tell Maynard's story, somebody else will. And so as the chief executive officer of the district, I need to be out and engaged in the community. I need to be a member of Rotary, going to the chili supper, attending literacy night at the elementary school or heritage night at Fowler, going to the National Honor Society induction, being seen and present and engaged. I've really had a great mentor in my current superintendent. He's a retired superintendent from New Hampshire, and our school committee chair jokes Mike would go to the opening of an envelope in the district, and I think that that has built tremendous credibility and respect for him, because people can engage him very casually. So if he's at the winter concert and there's a question or a concern or an issue, they can have that conversation then, and they're not going through the superintendent's executive assistant to schedule a meeting in a formal way where most issues can be resolved through a simple conversation. I would see that in my work with the president of the union here. I had a wonderful conversation with him this afternoon, and it's accessibility. And so a weekly meeting to touch base, to make sure that any issues that are bubbling up, I think using your building reps is an important piece of that, so that they're communicating with the president of the union, and the president of the union knows that he would have a weekly meeting with me in order to discuss issues. I think that I have enjoyed that relationship with the Nantucket Teachers Association, because I engage the co-president of the union in my building anytime there's a concern. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to agree on the resolution, but oftentimes I will tell her my thinking and say, this is what I'm considering, and she'll be on board and understanding and in agreement, or she'll say, that's not really, and be able to provide me information that I might be missing. So I think it's the accessibility, the transparency, the communication that makes for a successful leader, particularly in a small district. I do a Monday message every week to tell Nantucket High School's story. It goes out to parents, it goes out to the community, it goes out to students, it goes out to staff, and I use SMORE, which is this wonderful design template online, but it also has analytics, and I can see how many people open the message, where in the world. I have somebody that is in Sherman Oaks, California, that is the opening reader every week. I'm not sure why they're up at 3 a.m. when I'm sending it out at 6 a.m. on the East Coast, but how long they spend reading the message, you know, under 30 seconds, 1 minute to 5 minutes, things like that. So using that data as well. If I'm seeing that 1 week I get about 450 readers every week, but if I see that I'm getting 50 readers, that would be data for me. That's probably not an effective means of communication. We hold superintendent coffees, principal coffees. I have a loyal group of 6 people who come to those. And for some, they might say, well, why do you keep doing them? You have 6 of the same people that are coming to talk to you about 8th grade algebra once a month. But I do because it's important to them. And so they can then go out, and for people to say, well, I have this issue or this concern, go to the principal's coffee, or go, we know John has an open platform for you to have issues, and it's really kind of an open dialogue.
Thank you.
So before we move, we have enough time to, we have just a kind of closing question, but before we do that, we have the pre-submitted community question to move.
If there's time for it.
We do have time.
Well, alrighty then.
I promised you would.
Yeah.
We're doing well.
Hi, how are you?
Welcome back.
Maynard is looking to build a new elementary school in the next 5 to 10 years. We currently have an application filed with the MSBA. Please describe any experience you've had with the MSBA. Describe the role you played in your collaboration with the town government, and was funding an issue. What experience did you acquire from the renovation or new construction project that will assist you in future projects with the MSBA?
That's a great question. I did hear today that you got a favorable response from MSBA. I will say that might get a collective groan from the audience that we built a new intermediate school on Nantucket, and we did not need to go through the MSBA. And when it was raised at town meeting, nobody called the question. We had all prepared. We had areas that we thought might be concerns of the community in terms of costs or location, and it came up at town meeting, and nobody wanted to talk about it. It went through, which is amazing, and but I was involved in the building committee from when we determined what school we were going to build, because we looked at different configurations. We had a K-5 model. We were looking at, do we want to build a new middle school and make it 5 to 8? They talked about different transitions, and we settled on a 3 to 5 intermediate school. So we have the Nantucket Elementary, which is pre-K to 2, the intermediate school, which is 3 to 5, middle 6 to 8, and then the high school is 9 to 12. That creates a transition point for us from 2nd to 3rd, 5th to 6th, 8th to 9th. I was involved with the architects of designing the new structure up through the FF&E budget on furnishings and paint colors and tiles and all of that, which is the exciting part of the work. It's getting to town meeting, and I think that working closely with town government, I've enjoyed a tremendous relationship with the town manager on Nantucket. She wrote me a letter of recommendation. The assistant town manager is a reference for me, and I think it is because of open communication and being transparent and learning how to play well in the sandbox and knowing that you're not always going to get 100% of what you need. And they worked in partnership with us, which I think is why when it got to town meeting, there wasn't, people had opportunities along the way of having focus groups and community forums and parent input in the design process, in the configuration process. And so I think the more you can engage people before you get to those voting decisions, that you can go into it with a fairly good understanding of what the outcome will be. Our current superintendent had 7 bond issues fail in New Hampshire. And so he was very sensitive to the work that needed to be done. And I think I learned a great deal from him in the intermediate school process to how to get to town meeting for a successful outcome.
Thank you. So we have a closing question, and then we want to just open up to see what else you might want to say or ask. So first, we just would like to know, why Maynard? Why now? This is courtesy of Natasha.
Good question. Best one.
Well, I think I've talked about this a number of times today. My superintendent has been a great mentor for me and is aware that I'm ready to take the next step into central office leadership. Having been in Littleton, I'm familiar with Maynard, part of the Midland Wachusett Athletic League. As president of the State Principals Association, I've had an opportunity to interact with a number of people familiar with your district. And I think that there are a number of opportunities here moving forward that are a good match for my skill set, personally and professionally. It's a good time for me. As I said, my stepson is in North Carolina. My husband is a sergeant on the Nantucket Police Department, so I bring a good deal of insight into school safety and mental health, social emotional learning. And so we're excited for an opportunity to engage in a community where this, for me, is not a next stop. This isn't the next place to be, but it's a step in my career where I want to be. All of my experience has been in small districts. I'm a product of a rural school in Newcomerstown, Ohio. I was in Littleton. I've been on Nantucket. I value a small district, and I think there are tremendous opportunities here in Maynard for building a leadership team and capitalizing on the many strengths. As I started to say as president of the association, this is a very well thought of district. And there are, you are a comparative district for us on Nantucket. When we do data comparisons on budget and finance and students and attrition and all of those things, it's a comparative district for us. So I appreciate the opportunities that are here, but I also appreciate the many strengths, not the least of which is Tiger Pride, the amount of pride in this community. And I felt that in each of the buildings today. And I see that from each school committee member as well.
Thank you. So I guess we just want to give you the opportunity to let us know if there was anything else you'd like to share with us that you feel like would be good for us to know, or if you have any questions for us.
I do have questions for you. Student retention has been a common question. As somebody that would be learning why, what do you perceive or what do you know now as an issue for attrition? Why are people leaving the district, and at what points? Is there a specific place?
Who wants to answer that?
I'll answer.
You start.
We seem to be losing them at a couple of different places. Probably most prevalently in the 6th grade, going to AMSA. There's the perception that the students will have more and better opportunities at AMSA versus staying in Maynard. And also then the next level is going from the 8th grade to the 9th grade. We've been losing a decent number of students to Assabet Vocational, which is our, complementary district. We're part of the same. But there are some students that just go there with the same thought process, the perception that they'll, get a better education there. So that's sort of where we are.
I think also to add is at a district placement for special education. We've seen a trend, an increased trend there. And you had another aspect to that question was about what, but was it why?
When.
When.
So
yeah.
kind of the transition points is what I'm hearing
Right.
is.
Right. And another, one thing that we keep talking about and we don't do as well as we should, as much as we don't want to believe it, education has become a business, and it's survival of the fittest, and we do not do a good enough job of telling people how terrific our school system is, because our students go off and they are so successful when they leave here, and we really need to get better at doing that. We keep talking about it, but then we get caught up in everything else, and it just seems to not be the priority that it really needs to be, because everybody else does do that right from September on. So,
Can I add?
Yes, please do.
I think vertical alignment has a tendency to not be as continuous as it should be. I think there's some sidestepping from grade to grade rather than a vertical lineup. I also think that some of our pathways, our curriculum pathways, have been broken, and things that have been offered in the past might have either been diminished or taken away completely, and in trying to get students interested either in new initiatives or bringing curriculum to a lower grade to engage them earlier and then build the program back up. Those are the sorts of things that we need to be doing, just so that it's not like, oh, I can start this in high school, but oh, I can start this in 6th grade and continue on up through high school. And I think expanding the preschool is another thing, get the kids in early, get them engaged and making friends, and they want to stay at Green Meadow, and their parents would too, if, we supported that.
One of the aspects that we struggle with is the why always. I don't think the data collection is on the out-of-district from a parent perspective, gathering the feedback from the parent directly is as robust as it should be.
Yeah, I think we definitely have problems with getting the exit interviews.
Right, in a more
and having that good conversation back and forth where the parents feel comfortable sharing why they're leaving. I think that they feel like, well, I'm leaving, I don't need to tell anybody why.
Because there's been a history of maybe not wanting that feedback anyway, and on the side of the parents not feeling heard, so why bother?
Yeah.
I would also say that we're not, we're looking at ways to do better with this, but I think that one of the things that we aren't doing at this point is there may be, you may as a family for your child, there may be, have a rough year. And you might be able to do that, but you feel like you're communicating that it's been a rough year, and if you don't feel like you're being heard, and then you have another year that's rough for whatever the reason may be for your family, and you still feel that's not being dealt with, then what do? You start trying to, so I think part of it is the consideration of feeling like they haven't been heard along the way, so what's the point of sharing that now? So I think that there's breakdowns that happen along the way, and they aren't being caught for those families. So being able to find them, because there are a bunch of different reasons, and I think that part of this is if we see the data, but also recognizing when you're seeing an opportunity before we get to that point. Because I think I have not yet heard a family that said they really wanted their child, short of certain things, like certain children that blossom when they go to Aspet Valley. But a lot of these families, it's a reluctant and difficult choice.
I've sensed a lot of Tiger pride that I'm here today. I might be curious to hear from each member of the school committee what you're most proud of the district.
Gosh, wow. It's a deep one.
I am most proud of all of the accomplishments that our students do. I mean, just one example, this year they started, the principals at the Fowler started a junior National Honor Society for 7th and 8th graders. And to see these kids, there were 51 of them, and to see them all marching in with their sponsor, and then to sit there and to listen to what these students do over and above school. It is just mind-boggling, and it's like, and then they go up to the high school, and you hear the same thing, and it's like, there aren't enough hours in the day, and they do everything well. Good. And then, again, they go off, after they leave, whether it's to work, to the military, or to college, and to be successful. So sometimes I say, in spite of ourselves, our kids are doing phenomenal. Sometimes I think we get in the way. But so I'm just thrilled with the package that we create or help to create to make them be successful when they leave here.
I would say the WAVM program is one of the things I routinely hear great feedback from. And in particularly, the feedback I've heard from students who have gone through it in college is that, I never intended to join. Sometimes could be students who maybe felt different, they didn't fit in somewhere, and once they joined, it was the social family feel that they flourished. How that program had not only the technical skills that it taught them, but the social, emotional, other aspects that really allowed them to feel Maynard was home, and they were, had a place that they could identify with as well. So I think that is one area of Maynard I'm really proud of our district for, and how that continues to evolve and grow. And also the dedication of the music program in Maynard, and how the community keeps us in check with how their desire for us to routinely support the Maynard music program as a highlight of one of the major benefits Maynard has to offer, and the exposure the kids get to that integrated into their starting in 3rd grade but on. just the talent that witnessing the concerts recently, I was just so excited to hear how energized they were, and we have so many music concerts, and it's just a great thing to see the kids so excited. Before school they come in, after school they stay. It's built into classes at Fowler, and so that's one of the other areas. So the dedication to that has really been great.
WAVM, you built the entire building around the tower.
I know.
And a third of your
Exactly.
students
You
are
heard
involved
that.
in some way or another in that program, so that's
Yeah,
it's
so
a great
It's
example.
a very, very, very great aspect.
And they can
of-
start in 6th grade, which is also great. It's one of the programs that, like Lydia talked about.
Yes.
We have 2 more minutes.
I'll just be quick. I think what I love most is the character of our students. I remember being in high school, and if we had been given a quarter of the responsibility and freedom within our school that we give them, our school would have been destroyed. And these kids, like the Beacon Telethon, where they go all weekend, and they're there, and they have their sleeping bags and their pillows in the library, and they run the show, and they do all of it themselves, and they're motivated, and they're really good, impressive kids. And yeah, they act up because that's what teenagers do, but overall, like I've volunteered on several of the plays that we've had at the high school, and I worked at Green Meadow for a few years, and I'm just really impressed with our kids. And so I think a lot of the building of the character has to do with what goes on with the teachers and their relationships with the students.
And the telethon raised $33,000. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I think that other than some of our programming that Lydia mentioned, along with the Spanish immersion, I think that our community here, the parents and how involved they are in our schools is probably not unique, but is really fantastic, and especially how they came together this past year for the Green Meadow is really great.
And I guess I'm always hearing things that surprise me too. So there's all these little awesome things going on with just like with the teachers and different students, and you hear about something new all the time that you're just kind of like, oh, that's really cool that's happening. Oh, that's really great. Just there's so many opportunities and little connecting moments and engagement and sparks happening every day, and that can happen. I think that's more possible in a small district, and it speaks to more opportunity for us moving forward.
Wonderful. Well, you've given me the foundation for my marketing plan to know Maynard and to make Maynard better known. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for staying an extra day. And
Yeah.
Sorry
Yes.
to
You're a
snow,
trooper.
really.
Back to Fantasy Island.
Thank
Let
you
us go
tremendously
to Fantasy
for
Island.
your flexibility.
Yeah.
Thank you for all of your
Thank you.
flexibility. It was a big day for you. Lots of moving parts, so thank you.
It was really Lydia who
It was.
made it all happen. So we are going to take, and we're going to start again at 8:30 for anyone who's wanting. So that's 9 minutes from now, and we have 10 minutes between now and then, and
Should we take a break?
we'll take a break. So
Are we allowed to? Do we have to go out of session before we?
we do. Okay, so I'll
Ken Estabrook.
Ken says no.
He's the guru, and he says no. So.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, I think we can take a break.
Thank you.
Oh, I just, yeah. All set.
Great, thank you. So we are very excited for our public interview of Superintendent James Adams, who is currently superintendent for the Ashland Public Schools. Thank you for being here. We're really excited that you're joining us tonight, and we appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
So we're just going to go over very basically the structure of the interview tonight and give you a sense of how this is going to go. We'll have an hour and 15 minutes time. We have each taken 2 topic areas and addressed some questions within those topic areas for you. So overall, there'll be 10 topic areas that we will ask some questions 2 for each school committee member tonight. And then we did also request for any community questions, and we have a pre-submitted question that was put together, and we have so we'll have a community question for you as well. And then we'll end with we'll have just kind of a closing and see if there's anything else that you may wish to let us know, or any other questions you may have.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Very good. So anything else that I should, we're not timing per se, but we are just going to keep a little track. I'm going to keep us a little bit.
Sure, because it's 8:30 and, you know, you've been here all day.
That's right.
Right.
No.
I got it.
We're good.
You've been here all day.
Yes. So with that in mind,
Sure.
I'll start us off. So the first and foremost, yep, you got the list there.
I do, yeah.
And I do just want to make sure that everyone that's joined us tonight, there are papers in the back for you, for the community. I just wanted to point that out as well. And again, we are recording for anyone that's joined us. We are recording, but if anyone else chooses to record.
They can't figure some questions. Probably no questions for tomorrow night, right? So they can't record.
So, sorry, I'm getting some live,
That's all right.
live feedback here that we can't have anyone live streaming tonight because we want to make sure that everyone has a chance to hear the questions
Other candidates.
equitably. So we just want to make sure that that's clear. So thank you for saying that. All right, very good. So
Posted them on Facebook.
you're getting a little too punchy now. I know. Yeah. So now that you've had a day, you're reading the question.
Sure, I am, yes.
You can read it for us if you want. No, now you've had a chance to spend a day listening and learning in our district. And what impressions and observations rise to the top for you as you consider the unique strengths and the challenges of Maynard Public Schools, including what surprised you most today?
So, just okay, it's not too loud over there for the mics to pick up. I think my initial impression of the Maynard Public Schools, as well as the community, is didn't change much in terms of my knowledge base of the community. That being said, I certainly noticed within the teachers and affect at times, and just even noticing the questions that were posed to me by the staff as well as the parents, that there's certainly a sense of hurt, a need for healing, and an opportunity for morale to be boosted especially within the teaching staff. That was really clear to me, posed by a number of questions. And as much as I can see in watching school committee meetings and seeing how folks come to you and express their concerns, to hear it firsthand certainly resonated with me. To make it's more cemented for sure to know that this community of educators needs some healing. But that being said, there's this wonderful strength within the teaching staff that says we want to be healed and we want to be led, and we want to have someone here who can help us do that. So that's a really positive sign. I think when dealing with morale, and we talked about this today, it's really quickly to lose and to have poor morale. But it's really hard to build it back up to be a positive thing. And teachers recognize that, which I thought was great, that they're willing to give it an opportunity and a chance, and in so doing would put forth a great effort to do that. When I think about the unique strengths and challenges, obviously, as you head into the MSBA, which was exciting to hear, to at least be invited into the initial period, the eligibility period for the Green Meadow building, that's a really positive thing for this community. And again, you can go all the way back to last year and worrying about the concerns of the facility itself, but to now be invited into that process is really exciting and a great opportunity for this community. Then the size, to me, I forgot how small Maynard really was. I'm used to 5 buildings and traveling about 2.5 hours a day to visit my schools, and this took about 4 minutes. So thank you, Natasha, for driving me around. But, you know, to walk there. You could easily do that in 5 minutes to each building, and what a great opportunity for a superintendent such as myself who loves to be in buildings. Should never be an excuse not to be in buildings continuously. So I thought that was quite unique to have that campus feel. And other than that, I just felt the comfort again. For those who don't know, 15 years ago I left here. I moved here 21 years ago and started teaching at the high school, the old high school, the soccer field or whatever now. And I left 15 years ago. And while there are very few people here still left from when I was here, it still reminds me of the reason why I moved here from Vermont. It has that smallness, that quaintness, the dedication of a small community that you just don't get everywhere, that's willing to back a community. So that's really my initial impressions. So.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. What are the steps that you've taken in the past to make improvements to specific curriculum within your school district, and how did you implement the curriculum? What assessment tools did you utilize to determine whether it was working or needed further work?
So the one that comes to mind the quickest would be at our middle school, and I don't want to talk about a specific curriculum per se, because I think sometimes when we get into canned curriculums, it's not always the best approach to understanding how we changed teaching and learning. So for instance, at our middle school about 5 years ago was a level 2 school, and under that accountability structure, we weren't making progress in a lot of areas with our subgroups, our special education population, our English language learners, et cetera. But what we did do was we identified, when I took over as superintendent, how we were utilizing certain funds. Our Title I funds were specifically actually allocated towards professional development. And when I looked at it, I said, why are we not hiring teachers with those funds? Because we knew our math scores were really poor at the middle school. So what we did was we started the process of assessing students as they came in the 6th grade, and we hired a Title I math teacher to specifically provide supports for our students who were scoring at the lowest 20, percentile of the in-school assessment that we had. So it wasn't an assessment from a canned curriculum. It was one that our teachers put together based on our curriculum. And what we found was, because of that intervention and the early intervention identifying those students, our middle school in 3 years became a level 1 school, and which was tremendous. And it had a lot to do with the math scores. Our ELA scores were actually pretty good, but our math scores jumped significantly. What I would say is, we're undertaking a process now. We do a lot of curriculum reviews. So I can give an example. More recently, I can't give you data to suggest it's going to work, because we're just starting the implementation now. But we took a year working with our teaching staff to look at our K-5 literacy program. And we've been using a canned package called Journeys. And what we found out was no one was using it. Before I was superintendent, I was the high school principal, and I got to know a little bit more about elementary education because I didn't know much about it. And I found that we spent $250,000 on this product that we never used. It was not used to fidelity at all. Some classroom teachers used it, some didn't. Again, our literacy scores were not very good. So we spent a year with our teaching staff looking at different curriculum models. And just recently we decided to move forward with the Lucy Calkins Writers Workshop with the Foundations phonetic piece, because we've identified a number of our students as well. As I know, Maynard has focused a lot here on dyslexia, but also with early reading. And we're hoping that works. I can't give you any answers to that yet, but that's been our process. I believe that having teachers involved in decision making on what you're using is critically important. They're the ones who are doing the day-to-day work. And in order to use the curriculum with fidelity, they have to be a part of that decision-making process. And if they're not, they tend to not be as enthusiastic to use it.
So what's, I'm just going to follow
Sure.
up if that's okay. So what are you doing? Okay, you're implementing it.
Yeah.
And exactly what are the steps that you
So we have pre-test and post, like, so what will, you mean in terms of the assessment of how it's going to
like
work?
You said, you don't know if it's going to work. Well, how are you going to get to that point?
Right, so, yeah, so how, first and foremost, what we've done is we have baseline tests that our K through 5 teachers give with the reading. So we have, I can use the K, something called the Dial 4. It's an assessment when kids come in to identify where they are on a reading level or on a, and then from there, we can look at who needs additional help, and then we can retest them. Specifically, trying to think of the programs that we would use, but it's just, we have in-house programs that we've created to test reading levels. And then after a month, we retest. So we have kids moving in and out of our literacy and our reading teachers' classrooms all the time because they meet a certain level. So Mary,
okay, yeah.
No,
I guess
more succinctly,
decide if it's going to.
So right, so we're just in the process of purchasing and providing professional development this year.
Okay. So
and next year it'll be fully implemented. So we just decided, school committee just decided a month ago, after a year of investigating a program, that this is what we need to implement. So now we're in the process of providing professional development for our teachers to implement. And then we will, again, we won't know for a year after the testing process, if we've made gains. I don't think you can get immediate gain without allowing the program to take shape.
Thank you.
Like many districts, Maynard has not been able to consistently provide a level service budget because of cuts. This past year, we also experienced declining enrollment, which resulted in a decrease in Chapter 70 funding compared to previous years. Considering these potential trends in future years, how will you approach these issues while still providing an engaging curriculum to keep students from leaving our district and keeping out-of-district costs down? Who do you think are the key constituents that you would need to work with?
So you've certainly seen a declining enrollment. And when you look back at your numbers with regard to the number of students who are leaving this district, really starting in 2016-17 to charter schools, as well as your numbers to the vocational to Aspen Valley, which is almost doubled, right? So you've gone from almost 50 kids to 100 students. You're spending your out-of-district costs, and again, I understand it doesn't necessarily hit on the budget of the schools because it actually hits the ledger of the town. But that being said, it's $1 million, and it's increased dramatically. And so the constituents, first we've got to find out why are they leaving. And it's typically happening right around that 6th grade. Why are students leaving? And what can we do to have those conversations with parents and families to say, what is drawing you away from Maynard? And the Chapter 70 piece is, although the Student Opportunity Act was just passed, how will that impact Maynard? I'm not quite sure yet. I think the incremental changes in ELL, because your population's going up, so the incremental adjustment for low-income students as well, that may assist a little bit, but if your numbers stay flat, you're in that hold harmless. You're just going to get that $40 to $50 increase per student for Chapter 70, which for Maynard is probably about $40,000. And that's not significant. We know that. There was a lot of hope for the adjustment in the Chapter 70 formula to really help most communities, but Maynard is unique, as we all know, unique in a lot of ways, but it's unique in the sense that under the Chapter 70, your community is viewed as a community that has the ability to pay more towards the local education contribution than many other communities. Ashland's similar. We've typically been a community that's only gotten minimum aid, except we've seen a population growth of over 300 students in the past 4 years. So our number is increasing because of that. But when I look at here and the decrease in keeping the level services, you've got to analyze every single year the students in your classrooms. So I'm a firm believer in reorganization. Every single year we look at reorganization in our schools. If you've got, say, 60 kids coming into the kindergarten class, and last year you had 80, and we know 60 are coming in, we've got to look at that teaching staff and say, do we still need the same number? And in order to maintain the services that we're providing across the district. Those are hard conversations with budgeting, but they have to occur. I would certainly say the same thing at the high school level. Again, as a high school principal, I always went to my department heads and said, what classes do you need to run? How many students do you predict to be enrolled? Here's the enrollment number we're projecting for the high school. And it's going down by 100 students because of the incoming 9th grade is a lot lower. We may not need the same staffing. That's the reality of when you're trying to have a level service. And I think it's always important to communicate that to a community, the difference between level service and level funded. And the one thing I think we've done really well, and Ashland's another community that will never pass an override, let's be clear. An operational override has never passed, and it's been up for grabs twice, once under my watch, and it failed miserably. And it's a community that says, work with what you have, so continue to reassess and reevaluate every single time your budget. But that being said, having conversations with the town is really important. So we set a 5-year plan with our community and looked at the growth of the town. And that has, I think, really helped us. But it's the conversations. I think the engaging curriculum piece is important. We tend to forget that we move quite often away from those specials and those enrichment classes, which is the worst thing we can be doing is cutting those, right? I'm a firm believer in our music programs and art programs. We added back, we didn't have librarians, library teachers in our district. Those were the first things we added back when I became superintendent. And it's been one of the best things we could ever imagine. But it takes, it takes a lot of educating the community as to why we're spending what we're spending. And you've got your charter school, you've got your Aspet Valley expense. School choice is an option for revenue. I think, when you look at your choice numbers, you could increase the number of kids coming into the district for sure because you've, had decreased enrollment. The fear is how many kids are leaving. You can have students leave here, and I looked at your numbers for this year, and while you have only 13 and a half kids, based on Department of Ed's where they approach things, but it increased by $70,000 for one kid. It was over from 1 year, and I said, so what happened there? So I could easily guess what happened is it went from a $70,000 to $150,000 out of district cost for that child who is school choicing somewhere. So he choiced to another, or she choiced to another community, and then they were outplaced. And that becomes, again, a choice cost. You can recoup some of that through circuit breaker, but I would say this. I don't know how well you capture your kids in this district, in your student information system. So identifying them properly, if they're ELL kids, if they're low-income kids, if they're students who are on IEPs. If they're not captured properly and you're sending that data to the Department of Ed, who is then determining your Chapter 70 funding, you could be hurting your district. That was happening to us. We had mass enrollment, registration of new kids. They were not being put in properly. So we weren't capturing if they were ELL kids, which that increment matters. We weren't capturing if they were low income. So finding every nickel and dime you can is critically important as well. So.
Thank you.
You know what, may I go back to this, Lydia, just for a second? Because I think I can read twice into this. The out-of-district costs, we could be referring to a couple different things. And I want to be clear, because what I didn't mention was the rise in out-of-district costs for special education students. And I think out-of-district costs, you have a number, obviously. You have your school choice, you have your charter school, you have your vocational, but you also have the special education out-of-district. And I think we have to pause there for a second, because I didn't even mention that. That's a tremendous cost. And while some of it's unavoidable, which it is, because we can't, as much as I'm a firm believer in educating every single kid within your own district, there are certain kids that we just can't meet their needs. There are some students that have tremendous medical needs that have to be residential placement, or where we can't do that in a public school setting. But that being said, we've built 11 programs, internal programs in Ashland since I've been superintendent, saving $5 million a year. After a theoretical reimbursement, as you know, circuit breaker supposed to be 75% reimbursed, but it's not always. And we've done that through great planning and discussions with our Director of Student Services, but with our town, to say, look at this. If we have built a program for 3 to 4 students of the same profile, and we keep those students here, this is going to save us. And it's the right thing to do, because we believe in inclusion. And it's servicing 115 kids currently, the programs from K through 12, which is fantastic. So looking at internal options here as well is important. So instead of just assuming kids have to be outplaced, and then hopefully you build a good enough program and people want to actually come into that program and pay you tuition, which we have kids doing that. And it pays for a teacher salary. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry. I just wanted to go back to it. It was Mara's question. I'm sorry.
For anyone that has entered the room while Lydia's writing, we do have, if you did not notice in the back, there are papers related to the interviews, including feedback forms. Thank you.
How do you see yourself as an evaluator? Do you have a specific methodology for providing feedback and guidance? How do you ensure the improvement and development of district personnel performance? What is your procedure for dealing with employees who continue to fail to meet the goals that you have set for them?
So this is probably one of the most important roles I have, to be honest with you. My job as superintendent is to evaluate my directors and my principals of the buildings. That's the extent of my actual legal obligation. I don't evaluate teachers. I don't evaluate our paraprofessionals. I don't evaluate our athletic director. I evaluate our I don't evaluate our assistant principals. Principals and directors, that's where things lie. I have very high expectations for our staff. And what I would say is, I'm present constantly in buildings. I attend their site council meetings. I attend their meetings at night that they have with parent groups. So if they're doing a guidance presentation, if you will, at the high school, and the principal is presenting, I'm there observing. I'm having conversations with parents continuously. How do what's going on? What's the communication like with your administrative team at whatever school you're in? I look at that role very seriously. When I took over superintendent, we had I inherited an administrative team that I thought, for lack of a better term, was dysfunctional. And it took me 2 years plus, to evaluate, put people on improvement plans, If they didn't meet that improvement plan, then I didn't re-sign their contract. And I certainly think you have to have the right team in place, and you have to be willing to hold people accountable for what they do and how they do it. But it starts with me. And when I look at them setting their goals each year, how do the goals tie back to our blueprint for continuous student improvement? That's our terminology. Yours is a strategic plan, but all of their goals must tie back to that. Then, in addition, I've written into every contract how their pay structure, and it started with me because I felt like as a superintendent I have to lead and model what I'm expecting. So I take and have taken the superintendent's rubric and the 4 standards and said, if I meet X, then I get a 0.25% increase in pay. If I'm exemplary, it's a 0.5%. So not only is their evaluation being submitted, it impacts how their pay comes about. So methodology, feedback, we do surveys. As a principal, we would survey the teaching staff and the parents. As a superintendent, I do the same thing. So if one of my goals might be communication, I would send out a survey at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year, and we would look at that survey on communication, say, okay, did it improve? Did it not improve? Are there areas of improvement? And if so, does that result in a goal for the next year from the school committee? Similar with my principals. But I think more importantly, it's about watching them do their job every day. I sometimes sit in on their meetings with parents, not to be and I'll be very upfront with the parent. I'm here, or more often it's actually at a common planning time meeting. I'll go in and I'll sit in the back of the room, and my principals will say to the teachers, Jim's here because I have to be observed as well. I know I go in your classrooms, but he observes me, and he's writing his observation on how I'm running the meeting, and it seems to work well. As I said, the failures who continue, employees who fail to meet, you have to be courageous enough to say you're not doing your job well enough, and you need to go on an improvement plan. And once that improvement plan kicks in, if you have not performed well, then we have to part ways. And you know, my staff would say I would describe myself as very tough in that sense. I'm non-negotiable with high expectations. And if you don't meet it, we tend to part ways quickly. Some would say it's high turnover in admin at times, but I would say it's only been in like really 3 roles. A couple assistant principals, which didn't work out well. My athletic director, I had 4. They just weren't meeting the expectations that I had. And so you don't just come in and give them that 3-year contract. I don't. Typically it's a 1 or a 2 with the new administrator, because you want to make sure that before that next contract, the way the law is written is then it has to be 3. So you've got to be careful with that. And how to improve? Well, you've got to provide the professional development. It's like teaching staff. When I was a principal evaluating teachers, if you find that they're not doing something well, it's our obligation to make sure that you provide them with the opportunity to get better, to find the professional development they need. And if you do that, they generally rise to the occasion and get better. No one wants to fail. I mean, I have, in my 21 years in education, I have not met a teacher or an administrator who wants to fail. They may not have the skills, and then that's on us to help develop them. But even before you get to there, it's about good hiring. So I don't want, the evaluation's all well and good, but if you don't hire the right people, it doesn't matter. And I've certainly struck out a few times with my hiring, and that's probably why we've parted ways, more so than the evaluation. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So my question is on accountability,
Mhm.
and a couple of questions here. I think you touched on some of those aspects. So aside from personnel evaluations, how else do you plan to hold your leadership teams accountable on an ongoing basis in measuring improvements within each department at the district level, for developing and implementing school improvement plans at each school, and in the need to improve school culture that reinforces an inclusive mindset and reverses the trend of families seeking out-of-district education?
Okay. It's a lot there. I don't think we can overstate the need for accountability, right? And it starts with me, to be honest with you. Actually, it starts with the school committee, if I may be so bold. It's the tone that you all set that says we are a district that will hold each one of us, including yourselves, accountable for meeting the goals that you've all set forth in your strategic plan and in the school improvement plans. And while you don't have direct impact on the school improvement plans, that's the job. I am a firm believer in our lanes, if you will. If you hire good people and your principals are doing their job with their site councils and meeting the obligations as set forth, not only under MGL, but expectations by the committee and the superintendent, and you look at those improvement plans and you get to review them and provide feedback to the buildings. It's important that feedback is heard and then implemented. But I would say the school improvement plan, and I'm going to go out of order a little bit, Natasha, just because I've touched a little bit on a few things. I think the school improvement plans in many districts have been underutilized. And because what happens is we have always relied upon volunteers to partake in our governance of schools, right? So you get parents and you get teachers, and I've always been welcoming of individuals who want to be a part of that process. Unfortunately, if you actually go by the Mass General Law, that's not what you should be doing. I once had 23 site council members around my table as a high school principal. It was illegal because they weren't elected. We didn't follow the process. The first meeting in 40 days, once school begins. But guess what? They were really productive. I gave them a lot of work to do. That's the group that started our school start time change. They went out and did all the research and brought it all back, and that's how we began that conversation. But then what we realized was, is it really being effective long term? And how can we sustain it? And then I had a school committee change when I became superintendent, and they wanted to make sure we were following the actual procedures as outlined by Mass General Law. So we've been doing that. We're holding our elections each year. The PTO is putting it on, and we've actually found that we have a decrease in number of people willing to participate. So it's been a catch-22 for us a little bit. But that being said, they're critically important to hold each school accountable to your strategic plan. I think the school improvement plan should mirror the strategic plan for their building. It's not going to look the same at Green Meadow as it will at the high school, but you should see the similarities in terms of how they're meeting the overall arching district goals, right? And that should be the conversation of holding people accountable. So what are your strategic actions? Are you following through with those? Did you have outcomes that you expected? If you didn't have outcomes that you expected from those actions, what are you going to do? I'm a huge believer in reflection. You may not meet those goals. It's okay. They may be really lofty, but you've still made some gains. But I think what's important is that the strategic plan drives the school improvement plan. And the voice of students, teachers, parents on that committee should be really valued. And like I said, I don't think many districts do it well. I know that's just because we want people to be involved. I remember as an assistant principals, by the way, are not allowed on they're not part of a voting member of the site council. And I was always like, why is that? They're really integral in the plan and implementing the plan, but they don't have a say, technically. How do you hold your leadership teams accountable on an ongoing basis? Again, I touched base on it a little bit. You need to be present and you have to observe and you have to watch them. And you have to correct them when they're not doing the right thing, when they're not meeting your expectation. And my principals would tell you if you had a chance to talk to them, they would say, Jim expects us to be at everything all the time. We are present everywhere. We're at the concerts, we're at the games, we're at events on the weekends. It's tiresome, it's hard to do that. And especially at the high school level where there are so many activities going on. But that's my expectation. And I make sure I'm there too. So they're not looking at it saying, oh, he wants me to be here, but he's not going to show up. So you show that you lead by example with that stuff. I think measuring improvements within departments at the district level. So how do we know that the curriculum department, if you will, is making gains? Because it's not, I have this conversation with my assistant superintendent all the time of curriculum. And I said, Paul, hey, you have the best job. You have the best job of anyone in the district. Why would anyone not want to be the assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction? Parents aren't knocking down your door. You don't have discipline issues. You're not doing personnel evaluations. You're focused on really developing a plan to hopefully increase student achievement. And it's sometimes challenging to look back and say, because it takes a couple years, to say, are they really improving student achievement because of the things they're implementing? And again, it's bigger than that, right? We task the curriculum people to do that. We give them the autonomy to do their job. I'm not going to micromanage. Let's be clear, that's not my style. You find good people, you let them do their job. And if they're not doing their job, you hold them accountable. That's when the accountability piece comes into play. And so if we're not making gains in reading, like we've identified it as an indicator, third grade here in math, plot lines. Go look at your data, plot lines in the third grade. It rolls into the fourth grade. And then the MCAS, it rolls into the fifth grade. There's something missing. I don't know what it is, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it. I probably would task someone who does curriculum to say, why are we missing out on this? We're 12, 14 percentage points below the state average on certain questions. Why is that? And if you identify it, and in 5 years or 3 years or 2 years, sometimes we can't wait, right? We want that instant fix. If it doesn't work, then you have difficult conversations with people saying, we've got to find someone new to do the job. That's just the way it is. But the department levels, really here you've got your curriculum and you've got your director of student services, right? That's it in terms of, and that's what I have too. Well, now I have a new director of counseling and social emotional learning, but I have to hold my director of student services differently accountable because we've had really tough conversations, she and I, over the years with regard to, she's a service provider by nature. She came out of the service, she was a service provider to families, and she was a social worker, and it seemed like every single thing that came across my desk was, this kid is being outplaced, this kid, like, it was almost like there was a conversation I didn't know was happening with the team process. Like, why is every kid qualifying for something now? And it was one of those things where asking her to go back and look at her process was important. So holding her accountable for her actions and not always, not always just giving in to everything that people want. And that's really difficult to do too. You have to learn, that's a skill that she had to learn, how to push back a little bit in the process. But it took me pushing her to look differently. The school culture reinforces an inclusive mindset, reverses the trend of families seeking out of district ed. I talked a lot about that today with the staff about culture. And we talked about, and I said this at dinner, we talked about being visible and present and how they're two very different things. You can have a superintendent who's visible. Oh, I saw Jim walking through the hallways. That's great. But was he present? Did he stop in, talk to the kids? Did he stop in, talk to the teachers? Did he stop in, talk to the custodial staff? Did he stop in and talk to the nutrition staff? Was he present in seeing what was going on in the building? Or was it just a cursory walkthrough to say, look, I'm here in the building? And I think that will eventually change the culture to know that someone cares about them. And if anything, for my legacy, I think in Ashland would be that my staff and my students know I care about them. And that our culture has been developed by me being present, not visible, but present. I'm there. They know they can pull me aside when I walk by and say, hey, I'm having problems here. My principal hasn't been responding to my emails. Can you help with that? And I think that's how you hold those individuals accountable. I think I want my principals to hold my teachers accountable. That's their job. And if the teachers aren't doing that, then I have to hold the principals. If the principals aren't doing that with the teachers, it's my job to make sure the principals are doing their job. And your job to make sure that I'm doing my job, holding them accountable. So that's a lot of information in there. And hopefully I touched on the accountability piece. But
thank you. And I did have one follow-up.
Sure.
How would you handle the need to hold staff accountable if issues arise when it involves someone you have a close personal relationship?
Sure. So, that could be an interesting conversation, right? I would hope that I would know. I know specifically who I am. I'm a professional. And anyone I know, I am closer to, so there could be a concern, hey, Jim, you were in this community, you're coming back to a community that you have clearly demonstrated that you care a lot about, some of the teachers in this district. I probably am way closer in my 11 years, because I've been in Ashland way longer than I was ever in Maynard. I am way closer to a number of my teachers as the high school teacher, as a high school principal, and that staff than I am anyone in this community, with the exception of one.
Just going to say you guys.
With the exception of one. With the exception of one. But I would also venture to say that, no kidding aside, that one is probably one of the best teachers I've ever met. And that's not, I'm not saying that.
I'll say it.
Yeah, I truly mean that. But that being said, I have those challenging conversations all the time in my current district. I've gotten to know these people for 11 years, and I've gotten to be friends, like true legitimate friends. But they also know there's a line, and that line is our professional, and I'm a professional, and I will always hold people accountable. If there's one thing I would never ever want you or any of you to walk away from thinking, okay, if we brought him here, he might treat people differently because he has relationships within the community. That, to me, would be the most hurtful thing to me. I pride myself on my integrity, and I'm a professional. And that means when I'm at home, I'm a professional. We keep things separate, and that's important. That doesn't mean you can't have relationships. Your profile was really clear when it talked about, we want a superintendent who not only knows the teachers, but knows the teachers, like gets to understand who they are. So we can help build up their morale, build up their self-esteem again, and to show our appreciation for what they do. That came from you all, right? And I think that's really critically important to state. I would never have considered applying for this position if that was a thought that came across my mind, that I would treat someone differently because of a personal relationship. It's just not who I am. And if that's a concern, I'll be blunt. I mean, you go a separate way. I think you have to. But that's not who I am. So,
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jim, moving on to another topic, problem solving. Tell us about a time you problem solved effectively in your role as superintendent under a great deal of pressure. Conversely, please describe a problem-solving process you used under much pressure that did not work out well, and explain what you learned from that experience.
Can we just say snow days? Can we be done? Can we move on? No, I'm joking about that. Obviously, snow days are no pressure at all. We don't cancel an Ashland. That's so problem solve effectively under a great deal of pressure. It's easier to go in reverse for me, to think about one highly pressure-packed situation that I thought would work out and didn't work out. And as I said before, the growth in our community has been tremendous. And the way we are set up, we have 5 schools. We have a pre-K building in and of itself. We have a K2 building. We have a 3-5 building, a 6-8, 6-8, and a 9-12. And with our growth, our 3-5 building, which is now in the MSBA pipeline as well, we're in the feasibility phase, it holds about 590 students. We're at 660 and growing. And so we recognized this about 4 years ago, that this was going to be the trend and it was continuing. Our middle school can hold 880 students. So Jim Adams had the bright idea, because the 3-5 building used to be a middle school. Why don't we just flip the kids from the middle school, the 6, 7, 8 kids? We could actually keep the 6. So we could actually have a 3, 4, 5, 6 building. We have enough room to meet and then just move the students from the 7th and 8th grade kids to the David Mendez School, the Mendez School. I'm thinking, wow, you just solved a great problem. Well, little did I realize that not only was I causing $1 million adventure, because we would have had to adjust, by the way, the stall heights of the bathroom, in both buildings, because the little kids couldn't use the adult size, and the transportation issues. So I had this plan laid out. I presented it to school committee. They accepted it, saying, yep, we're going to do this. And it made good sense because we were still continuing to grow. And we were not sure we could get into the MSBA pipeline. We had actually been denied the first time through. So here I am, and about 6 to 8 months before we actually get into the summer where we're going to make the change. And going back to the accountability piece, I let a principal go. And I moved a principal from our K2 school into the 3-5 school. And Dr. Kyra is his name. He said, Jim, we don't need to do this. I'm like, what do you mean we don't need to do this? I've already committed, school committee's committed. We went to the town, we're gonna ask for the funds to make this move. I can rearrange the building in the classroom space to make this work for us, so we don't incur these costs. Well, what I learned was I had a better visionary moving into that school than trusting the individual who was there before and said, there's no way we can do this. My mistake was thinking I had the right principal in there, knowing full well I probably didn't, and that's why I ended up letting him go. But it was me learning the hard way that with a little more time and a little more thought, that it could have been done differently. And I'm glad, and my school committee is glad, that we didn't move. We're still out busting at the seams, but now we're in the pipeline for a new building, and that will occur, hopefully for that community. But that was a tough thing for me to go through. Whenever you make a decision, you get a 5-0 support in your committee, and then you've got to go back. Never be afraid as a leader. Never be afraid to say, hey, I messed up. I got it wrong. I think way too many leaders and look at a situation and always stand on their decision, when sometimes we get it wrong. It's okay. It's all right. Just admit it. I wrote to the community. I constantly write to my community, talking about things, and quite often I'll say, I got this wrong. I'm sorry that, it caused a lot of angst, but I'm human too, and we looked at the data. We thought it was the right move. It just wasn't. On the flip side, I think a good decision that we've made that was really difficult in our community was, I am a student-centered first decision maker, period. End of discussion. If you ask me how I make a decision, it's based on what's best for students. You may disagree with what I think is best for students, but you'll know why, I think. We changed our school start times at the high school and the middle school, and it took me 2.5 years. Oh, closer to 3 years. I was the high school principal when I began the process. And community forums, all the research, bringing in brain-based research scientists, doctors, looking at all the data. And we know that adolescents, as much as you think, I can't say this to my freshmen, hey, Alex, go to bed. It's 10 o'clock, you need sleep. The bus is coming at 6:20 tomorrow. He's not going to sleep. He doesn't have his phone in his room. He doesn't have a computer in his room. It's not technology that's keeping him awake. It's his body. It's his biorhythms. We know that that's actually scientifically proven. So we held these forums, and the school committee did a really nice job that we had 2 sessions, open sessions, just to talk about the start time change. I made a recommendation to change the start times after, again, 2+ years. School committee wanted me to go even later. So we changed from 7:30 to 8:20. They wanted me to go to 8:40. I said, no, let's do let's try this first. And the conversations with our teaching staff and our parents was what was really challenging. Teaching staff was, at the high school, was used to getting out at 1:55. They were now getting out at 2:45. And the conversation I had with most of my teaching staff was, and even parents, to be honest with you, was, this is going to impact me personally. And I said, no, I understand that. No, Jim, you don't understand. It's going to impact me personally. I said, no, I do understand. But what have I always based my decisions on? What's best for kids? You're right. Do you think this is what's best for kids? Yes. Then that's where I'm landing on this decision. And if I have the support of the committee, then that's where we're going. But on the flip side, we made that change. I gave them 9 months before we implemented, a full school year. I gave them the opportunity to get, quote unquote, their house in order, if you will, right? They knew it was coming. There was no way they could say to me, we didn't realize we were going to change start times. Now, I'll tell you this, 6 months, every month I sent an email out saying, by the way, remember, we're changing start times, we're changing start times, we're changing. So by the time June rolled around, before the beginning of the year in August, I had a teacher say, this is real. Yeah, I've been telling you since February, every month, this is real, prepare. And, but I think that was a really good process we took. I think the decisions you make, it's all about the process, right? If you're inclusive in the process, quite often we'll get teachers and families say, I didn't know about it. Well, did you not know about it, or did you not care about it until a decision was made? Because quite often you're going to get people here to come to a school committee meeting after you make the decision. Sometimes I think it's just easier to make the decision and then have a discussion, right? Let's make something up and say, we're doing this. Maynard, next year, start times are 9 o'clock for high school kids. you'll have people here at your next meeting. And now, oh, no, we really didn't mean that, but we'd like to engage you in the conversation of how we can move forward, right?
This video will be out.
Yeah. No, I mean, and then for all of you research people say, okay, Jim, what's the data saying this is really good now since you've done it, this is your 3rd year? I'm going to tell you, I don't care about it. And we made a decision in our community. It wasn't based on grades. It wasn't based on attendance. Those things are what most districts look at and say the reason why we're changing our start times has a lot to do with our academics, performance, as well as school tardiness and absenteeism. Never came into a discussion with us, not once. It was about their health. It was a health crisis to us. And when we look at our Metro West Adolescent Health Survey and look at stress and look at the number of students who are less stressful and are sleeping more, that's happening. And again, it wasn't about academic performance, which many districts look at it that way. California got it right? They just made state law. They changed it for the entire state. And it's difficult because, we're 2 working parents too. I've got to get my kids to school. I get that. So that would be a good one. And it was difficult, believe me. I was strung up all over the town.
So I do just want to point out that
it's late. I know, I've talked too much.
No, that's good. We're getting a lot of, it's good.
I started late.
We're still awake, so that's a good thing. And you are awake, that's good.
I'm always awake.
So my question is about decision-making.
Yeah.
Can you provide 1 or 2 examples of a difficult decision that you had to make in your current district? Describe your process for thinking through these decisions, and if you rely on others to help you think through the decisions, tell us what quality you value in those people.
So I would say, to a fault, I am the most collaborative decision maker you'll find. And I say that because I try to gather as much input as I can from as many constituents as possible. And that sometimes slows down the process of making a decision. And sometimes a decision just needs to be made right away. And in my role, sometimes it's, can be done right away. We have a saying in Ashland that there's a you decision. So it's on you. You make that decision. I trust the decision you're going to make. There's a we decision which is the majority of our decisions. We are going to talk about this and make that decision. And then there's a me decision. And sometimes I have to make that decision for you and for everyone for the betterment of our organization. So that's sort of how I approach things, but the majority of the time it's the we. So I would say recently this would go back to Bethlyn's problem solving. We have a multi-age program in our elementary, our 3-5 building. 20 years ago, it was started as an opportunity for students to engage in a 3-year process with the same group of 7 teachers. So a third of our class coming up from, at that time it was a 4-5-6, but now it's a 3-4-5 building. So we'll do 2nd grade because that's the group it currently impacts. So when I started, a third of the class, so about 60 students of the 180 at that time, would get into this program. It started out as a lottery-based program originally, similar to your Spanish immersion. And it was designed as a project-based learning setting. So it was really a school within a school. And think of, if you're familiar with the Montessori model, where kids come in and have a lot of autonomy to do what they want to do to a certain extent, but there's role modeling, right? The older kids are role modeling for the younger kids, which is a great benefit of this part of the program. But think 20 years ago to today. 20 years have passed in research and in educational practice. Most of our teachers are single grade, or what people call the traditional programming, are doing project-based learning. They're actually taking students in our 4th grade teaming, where one teacher's teaching math because that's really their strength. The other's teaching the ELA, and one's teaching the science. Those are things that were happening in that multi-age program. It's 20 years old this year, and Jim Adams decided that, oh, sorry, I think we need to have a conversation about equity and about equitable opportunities for all kids, because that program did not have ELL students in it. It did not have special education students in it. It did not have a diverse population of student in it. It had truly become, and it had lost its luster. It was not a lottery anymore. It truly had become an entitled program. And the students who were going in there certainly were in the high end of the spectrum and had all the family resources possible. So we did a study. I brought in the teachers. I brought in parents. We spent about a year and a half going through the process and coming to the conclusion that it was not equitable. And as we are creating a new elementary school, we are going to change the model of teaching in our 3 through 5 building. So getting rid of that program, that's the wrong way to say it. It was really about taking what was best of that program and what's best to the single grade program and merging them so it's consistent. The staff felt as though they were on an island unto themselves. You want to talk about a poor culture and climate within a building? The traditional staff felt as though the neighborhood staff ruled the roost. They had all the bright kids. They had no discipline issues. They had nothing, right? The parents who were really supportive of them. So it created a lot of angst within our community. My 5 school committee members had kids in that program, and which was really an interesting dynamic. And all of them voted in favor of actually moving away from that model to a new model. But it took us a lot of time, and it took us a we decision. Right? It was that we decision where we had the teachers, we had the parents. And believe me, I posted online, if you want to go look at all the letters that people sent to me and to our school committee saying, what are you doing? This is the best thing in the world. And you're getting rid of this program that, and you want to talk about a political nightmare, Senator Karen Spilka, State Senate President, started the program when she was on the school committee in Ashland. I had to call Karen personally and say, Karen, just so you know, this is what I'm thinking of doing. And she was like, Jim, if you think it's best for kids, then I trust you. It's still a very raw for me because it just happened probably a month ago. But it was collaborative. And it was done in a way that folks, I think, are walking away knowing why we did it and why I recommended that.
Thank you. What are your views on special education ELL pullouts as they relate to classroom inclusion and the need for paraprofessionals? Can you give an example of how you have dealt with this issue in your district? What outcome did you have, and was it what you expected?
Yeah, paraprofessionals, if I use the term ESPs, just so you know, we call them education support personnel. It's the same thing, but it's just the lexicon that I have now is ESP. I am a full believer in inclusion. Of all of our students on IEPs in our district, 87% of the students on IEPs are either partial or full inclusion. State average is 78%. I'm really proud that that's how we approach our education in Ashland. But it comes at a great cost at times with making sure you have the appropriate personnel in those classrooms. You have a high number of paraprofessionals in this district, almost 80 for a small district. And for me, it's always evaluating what are their roles within the district and how they're being utilized, because you don't want to underutilize. Quite often I find my director of student services, I've got 5 more paras that are knocking at my door signing contracts to come in. I'm like, well, what classrooms are you going to? Was it the team process that determined we needed more? And if so, great. I'm totally on board. I trust the decision that was being made. So inclusion piece, as much as possible, I believe in it. There are times you have to pull out. There's no two ways around it, especially ELL. We have students who have zero capability in terms of speaking English at this point in time. They come in, they don't have that skill set. So we have to pull out for sure. We have other students who have the English language not fully mastered, but we can keep them included, and then we just provide some push and support to them. Our numbers have grown dramatically, sort of like here. We're well over, when I started, we had 50 ELL students. We're at 220 right now. This district has about 75 to 80, and they're all at the elementaries. I think we might be one of the only districts that actually hired an ESP, paraprofessional, at the preschool level for English language learners. We actually took some Title III grant money and hired a paraprofessional to do ELL at that level, which I thought was creative on my Director of Student Services part. The need has to be warranted for sure, right? I mean, we have limited resources. You have limited resources in this community. We want to make sure we're spending those resources appropriately, but we also want to make sure that we're providing the supports that all kids need. I'm a firm believer that we want to keep every one of our kids in district. I said that. We've built those programs in Ashland, not just because of the financial savings, but because we believe in inclusion. The benefits of kids who are included, by the way, is greatly, there's great benefit after they leave the school system. They make more money. They get better jobs. Those statistics are real. And we become, as individuals, more empathetic, more sympathetic, more understanding of our diverse community around us. So it benefits every single one of us, the inclusion piece. Again, I think, can you give an example of how you've dealt with the issue? I think it's a matter of making sure that if the team comes up with a recommendation, that we follow the recommendation of the team for sure. When we build programs, we're attaching, a therapeutic program, for instance, at our middle school we just created for students who have some number of significant trauma-based experiences at home or personally in other ways. And we hired 2 paraprofessionals just for that room with a specific teacher for 4 kids. And then we attached a half-time psychologist to that room. And the nice thing was those students were able to, they get pulled out for math and English, but science, social studies, wellness, they're pushed in, and the pairs go with them, but they're not dedicated just to that student. They're actually helping the rest of, that's how the model should work anyway, right? I mean, you want to make sure that they're providing services to all kids in the classroom.
Thank you. How are we on time?
I don't think we'll be able to get to the pre-submitted questions. We have 5 minutes left for questions.
I'll be quick.
Okay.
I can do it.
Still have 3 questions.
That's 1.25 minutes per.
All right.
So maybe we should, which do we feel is the most important out of the 3 remaining?
Just be quick. Yeah, everybody, yeah.
Please give examples of teams that you have overseen in the past. Describe one that worked well and one that had functional issues. How or why were they different? What methods did you find were effective in maintaining the engagement and commitment of each group?
Good question. The University of Vermont Catamounts basketball team I coached was dysfunctional. Middlebury College was pretty good. No, so, I joke, I jest, but it's true. My admin team is critically important to the success of our district. And the one I currently have is functioning at a really high level. So, if you look at, Jim Collins' The Good to Great books, or Peter Lencioni, and you're looking at leadership and asking those individuals to participate with you in talking about leadership and reading and growing professionally, that to me has been critically important to performing at a high level. Allowing good people to do their jobs, but going back to the question about accountability and holding them to be accountable, and is how a highly functioning team works. Knowing what each person's strengths are and weaknesses are. I am not a special education director. I am not the director of curriculum. But what I am is someone who has a vision for what a good school should look like, what good teaching is, because I've been a teacher. I see good teaching every day. We do learning walks as a group to see what good teaching looks like, and we come back and talk about that. What did you see in that classroom? And a perspective of a high school teacher in an elementary classroom is really neat to have that conversation. And then an elementary principal in a high school classroom, very different lens. And in order for us to become better evaluators, we've done that and we do that. So that team is highly functioning. If they know their role and they know their limitations and they can identify it, then we're going to be a better team. I had dysfunctional teams for sure. And that's one of the books, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And it's when it's about me, not about us, when it's about not having the skill set to be a productive member of the team, that's when it falls apart. And that's my job as superintendent, is to ensure that my team members have the skills. And if they don't, again, I'm not afraid to have them move on. It took me a long time to build the team I have right now. It's really good. It's a really good, they can function without me all day long. Next 3 days, because I'm not going to be there. But they can do it, right? So the method to find good hiring practice takes me a long time to vet out people. Not as long as you all. But it takes a long time. You want to make sure you get the right people, and they have to have the same value system that I have or that we have. So
I'm going to go right into the next slide.
Do we have time?
Yep, we do. Yep, we do. How
We
do
got time.
you
3.
use effective communication skills to engage and build relationships with internal and external stakeholders in order to advocate the district's priorities, to disseminate your leadership message in a manner that gains buy-in, and then specify the framework of engagement you follow to ensure your leadership message is connecting with union leadership?
So I'll do the union leadership piece first and make that real quick. When I became superintendent, I require all of my principals to meet weekly with their union representation. So they have a standing meeting in every building. I have a standing meeting with my union president. She just happens to be in my building every week. And we have a standing meeting myself with the entire union leadership monthly to discuss issues that are happening within the district. And I think that has allowed us, that engagement has allowed us to develop a respectful relationship. And while we have not had any grievances in my 6 years, we've had great conversation about what a grievance would look like should they move forward with it. But I think they look at me as a very fair manager of people, and because I care about people first. And that is communicated again by the presence I have in the building. Overall, with the communication skills to engage, this year I changed, part of our communication survey to the community was, Jim, you communicate a lot. And so do your principals, because we send out weekly emails from our buildings. And they were all over the map. One was on a Sunday night, one was on a Thursday, and one was, so the community messaging to me was, Jim, we want consistency. So every Friday, each building is sending out their messaging. I send a message out every single Friday to our community. And it's also translatable in 5 different languages. I use MailChimp. You know, I found a program that I liked that you can embed it quickly. It'll automatically translate it if you pull it up on your phone or in your. It's just perfect for our community, which has a lot of. I have 26 different languages in my community, and it's been great. So I'm also active, you know, with kids, especially on Twitter. That's where they get a lot of their information. They would tell me, not anymore, Mr. Adams. That's gone by the wayside. There's something new. It's the beauty of having a freshman son. But the buy-in piece, again, I want to be in front of people. It's best if it comes from me verbally. And I host forums all the time. I have a parent group that I meet with monthly that then goes out and spreads the word on the soccer field, if you will. Then goes to the site councils. They're members there. I go to the site council meetings. Part of, again, I do an evaluation of my principal who's running it. But then I'm there to present information from the district lens. So I would say internal and external, getting to the community center. I cook breakfast with select board members and school committee members. We do it once a year. But when I have my budget, I actually go up there at lunchtime and present it at the community center for our seniors who are having lunch. So it's critically important that whomever you hire takes the time and effort to visit and meet with all of the citizens in this community. You're going to need that support for not only your budgets, but moving forward with the Green Meadow project. And that's critically important to communicate why it's needed and how it fits within the overall makeup of this community. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. We'll move into our closing question. We won't have time to ask if there's anything else you want to share with us.
Shared a lot.
But the final thing is, why Maynard, why now? And I do ask that if you could keep it to just a minute or two.
Yeah, see, what I missed, though, is Mary Branley with her red card and yellow card saying time is up.
Oh, really? I was told not to do that.
Oh, well, it would have helped me.
There you go.
I'm a very energetic and person. So 1 minute, just time. I rephrased that question as to why not why. I think too many people will look at this opportunity and have phrased that to me. Why, Jim, would you leave? You just signed another 6-year contract. You've been there 11. Why would you leave a situation you have? And I say, why wouldn't you want to go to a community that cares about kids, that has tremendous potential, that to me is caring, that is inclusive, and that is in need of someone personally and of what I believe I have to offer this community from a skill set. I'm ready for that challenge. It's not that Ashland isn't providing me with challenges anymore. It is, but it doesn't have the pull for me that this community does. 21 years, I left 15 years ago. I've still felt like this is a community I need to come back to. This is my only chance to do it. I have not applied anywhere else, and I will not apply anywhere else. If I don't get this job, I'll retire in Ashland. I'll be happy retiring in Ashland. But I would be much happier with the opportunity to look at this district and say, look what we've done in 12 years when I retire. So in 12 years, you look at your superintendent and say, you're committing to us? Yeah. This is how long it's going to take us to get this done. It's not going to happen in 2 or 3. But that's why. This community has a special place for me. And it's not about finances. It's about doing good. There's just part of me that is ready for that next challenge. 1 minute.
Good job.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Sorry it took so long.
All right.
No, it's not good. I missed a question or two.
We are going to close the public interview with entertaining a motion to do so.
I make a motion that we close this public interview.
Second?
All in favor?
Yeah.
Good.
All right, so moved.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Please.